Let's give a Think Aloud for reading a try. So, I'd like for you to record a short Flipgrid of you doing a reading Think Aloud. So, here are some guidelines for how to do that. So, before you begin, of course, you'll want to choose a paragraph of text to read aloud. And if the first paragraph or the paragraph that you're going to do is very short, choose a couple so that you have enough. Perhaps the text you chose for your lesson plan, some of you had planned to begin reading together, so the first couple paragraphs or the first paragraph of that would be great. Or you could even go back to the text, the simple text that you used for your previous strategy practice, or honestly choose any paragraph of text. It doesn't really matter which one you choose, as long as there are ways that you can do the think aloud with it. You'll also want to choose what you'll focus your think aloud on. So for example, you might focus on sort of comprehension-based think aloud, making predictions, thinking aloud your visualization, thinking aloud making connections. That doesn't have to be the only thing you do during this practice, but it might help you to have a little bit of a focus so that you can maybe think of what the think alouds would sound like. I want to remind you too of this helpful chart that I posted. This is from Reading Rockets, a Think Aloud checklist, and this also has keywords, words that you can use to start your think aloud. This can kind of help us as we're getting the hang of the think aloud, but it's divided by the type of strategy. So if you want to focus mainly on visualizing, which is always a fun think aloud to do, you would say things like, okay, I read that and I see this, or I picture this. The key is though, or one key is, you don't just want to say, as I'm reading this, I'm picturing a waterfall. You have to also sort of explain why these things are happening. So you want to go a step beyond that to verbalize the thought processes that led you to that. So if you say like, oh, I'm predicting that this will happen, you want to say, because we got this information, I predict this, so that they understand the full thought process. But this can be really helpful for you as you're practicing a think aloud. And again, that's just based on the type of strategy or the type of practice that you're mainly focusing on. It's also a good idea to pre-plan a few moments that you're going to pause and think aloud. Some of them you want to happen organically and naturally, but especially as you're getting the hang of the think aloud, you probably want to already identify a few places in the text where you know that for the students, for the purpose of your students, that you're going to pause there and verbalize your think aloud. Also, make sure you practice reading the paragraph aloud before you record your practice, just to make sure you don't stumble on any words, unless you're trying to model what to do when you stumble on words, in which case you want to preserve some stumbling and then be like, oh, that's a tricky word, let me break it down. I know to break down a word, I read the first syllable, then the next syllable, right? So unless that's what you're working on, you want to make sure that your reading of the paragraph is really fluent. So for the actual practice, I want you to pause at least 3 moments to do an intentional think aloud. More is great if that would happen naturally within your paragraph. Remember, a think aloud is in first person, so you're speaking, you're using I as you're pausing to do your think aloud. It's not the same as just giving instructions, remember? So you don't say, okay, if you come across a word, you're going to pause. Instead, you say, ooh, I found a word that I'm unfamiliar with, so I'm going to pause. I'm going to circle the word. I'm going to use context clues. So what do I see around the word? Oh, yeah, over here's this, right? So it's all from first-person perspective, and the goal is to verbalize your thought process as you read. Making that thought process explicit is really valuable, especially to struggling students who don't have yet those types of reading skills, right? So it's sort of verbalizing what an expert does so that they can adopt the reading habits of an expert. They don't have to do it in exactly the same way we do, right? We're not trying to turn them into little robot versions of ourselves, but how that thinking process helps when they have access. It's really about access, right? Giving students access to how these processes work, and then they can have access to it in their own reading skill box. So here's an example from the Story of an Hour. This is a great little short story, often assigned around the same time as the yellow wallpaper. So this goes really well with the yellow wallpaper theme for those of you who have chosen that one. So the Story of an Hour. And I'm just going to pause and do the think aloud as I go. Knowing that Mrs. Mallard was afflicted with a heart trouble, great care was taken to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. Okay, wow, I'm going to pause right here in the reading. This is a big first sentence. We know she's got heart problems. We know her husband has died. I'm going to go ahead and do some questioning, right? Because already I have questions about what I'm reading. So I am wondering what he died of, and I am wondering what type of heart trouble that she has. I predict that she's going to have a really negative response and reaction, and she's going to get like really sick and maybe even die. I've heard of people before like making, now I'm like making a connection in Think Aloud, right? Like text to world or text to text, text to personal connection. So I have heard of people who die of like a broken heart after someone they love has died. So I'm wondering if that's going to happen in the story. So I'm going to continue on reading now. I want to find out some more of what's happening. It was her sister Josephine who told her in broken sentences, veiled hints that revealed in half concealing. Well, that's a little bit confusing, but I think it just means like her sister was having a hard time telling her, like she didn't want to upset her too much. Veiled hints that revealed in half, so reveal, conceal, hints. I think like they tried to break it to her easy. Like sometimes doctors do that. So I think maybe that's what's going on there. Her husband's friend Richards was there too, near her. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received. Oh, now we know. Okay, so I was wondering what he died of. Now I know it's a railroad disaster. And I'm wondering if that's going to make it even harder for her because that's like a sudden tragedy. Like she would not be expecting that. So I wonder how she's going to respond to that. With Brentley Mallard's name leading the list of killed. Oh yeah, her name is Mrs. Mallard. So Brentley Mallard must be her husband's name. I was a little confused there for a second, but I went back a little bit to remind myself that her name was Mrs. Mallard. Okay, I got it. Brentley Mallard's name leading the list of killed. So he died in a railroad disaster. She's got heart problems. They're breaking it to her gently. I'm ready to go on. He had only taken the time to assure himself of its truth by a second telegram and had hastened to forestall any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message. Wow, they're really being careful with her. She must be really like fragile. Or maybe they just think she's fragile because I know this is from the time period where women were sort of treated that way. She did not hear the story as many women have heard the same with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. She wept at once with sudden wild abandonment in her sister's arms. Uh-oh, I wonder what's going to happen to her. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. She would have no one follow her. Oh no, I'm kind of worried at this point. Like, is she going to kill herself? Is she going to be okay? Are they going to be able to take care of her? And I'm really interested to see what happens next. So I want to keep reading for sure. So that's a Think Aloud. I paused a lot of times, and you don't have to pause that many times, but I paused to make predictions, I paused to make connections, and sort of just help myself with comprehension when I came across something tricky. But it was in that first person I. And sometimes even reminding myself of things like my teacher would have told me. Like I know I should go back and try to recover the information I'm missing to help this make sense, right? So I'm really excited to see your practice. Remember, these are just practice, just experience getting, we can read about Think Alouds all day long, but until we actually let our voices try it, it won't really become a part of our toolbox. So that's the purpose here of sort of verbalizing our Think Alouds, because once we do or try a strategy, we're much more likely to come back to it in the future. So I'm really interested to see what you guys think about modeling and Think Alouds in your work this week, and then really excited to hear you all and see you practice them on the Flipgrid. So let me know if you have any questions. Bye.